Hello, welcome to Weekly Update. I'm Bill Galvano. In the state of Florida, we have 40 senators. Now these 40 senators represent some 19 million plus Floridians. Of these 40, 2 of them are elected by their peers to serve in the top 2 posts. One is the Senate President, who is the presiding officer. The other is the Senate President pro tempore, who serves alongside the presiding officer and in the presiding officer's absence. Right here in Manatee County, our senator, Senator Michael Bennett, is the Senate pro tempore of the Florida Senate. He is also our guest today. Mike, welcome.
Thank you, Bill. I appreciate the invitation.
Mike, let's talk about being the Senate President pro tempore. Now you've had a full career in the Florida Senate, a very successful one, and now you've risen to top leadership. How's it different?
You know, it's different because you have a seat at the table. You have a seat at some of the policy decisions. I think you certainly owe your loyalty to the presiding officer, and I think that you get selected as pro tem because of your loyalty to the presiding officer and willing to, but also on the same token, be willing to think on your own and sometimes buck those situations. Common sense says you don't do it in front of the body, you don't do it in front of the people, but at least you have the opportunity to go in the back room and sit down and say, geez, do we really want to do this? Is this really going to be good? No, it's a wonderful and honorary position to be there, so I was excited about it.
Well, one of the things you're known for is your ability to think on your own, and we're glad to have someone who thinks on their own in the Florida Senate. And I know it was not an easy session this year, and we needed some independent thinkers. What were some of the big challenges that you had?
When you're sitting there trying to figure out how you're going to balance a budget and at the same time protect the most vulnerable, protect the senior citizens, protect those children, find a way to have that education be funded, some of those decisions are tough. You know, some of the decisions, for example, we were talking about, I did disagree with the Senate President on some of the cuts. I wanted to expand some of the scope of practice things. For example, the nurse practitioners, allow them to do it. That could have saved $100 million for Medicaid. $100 million 1 year. But the policy decision was that we would try to do it without expanding scope of practice. We would try to handle the Medicaid cuts without jeopardizing the services that we give to the people. So we were looking for ways to make it more economical. And it was really interesting because I've always said there's a lot of waste in government. I don't think we have a revenue problem. I think we have a spending problem. And so as we were trying to look at how can we control spending without cutting services, those are tough to do. And you're fighting the political side of it. You've been there. You know how tough some of these decisions are. The first 2 or 3 cuts we had, you were involved with. And this year was even tougher than those. So I think it was the budget cuts that made it such a tough year.
And it's not just cutting the budget. You mentioned the scope issue. And when you make cuts, there is often a policy argument and counter-argument that goes along with the cuts.
Well, it is, because, you know, you look at, for example, and not to harp on that, but say the nurses, okay? You've got a policy decision of trying to protect our doctors in the state of Florida. I did not want to balance the Medicaid budget on the back of the doctors. I think they're reimbursed too low as it is. You know, we've got these people out here scrambling for money, trying to figure out how they're going to hold their practices together and still provide good services. But at the same token, I'm trying to find $100, $200, $300 million for Medicaid, which would help more disadvantaged people, transportationally disadvantaged, handicapped people, senior citizens. And so you're trying to balance those two. And oftentimes, after you make those decisions, you sit there and you shake your head and say, God, I wish it would have been easier. I got to tell you, Bill, this job was a lot more fun when we had money. It really was. But it was a good cleansing time. You know, I don't know who it was that said it. You know, a good recession is a horrible thing to waste. And I don't think the Florida Senate wasted it this year. Neither did the Florida House. They took advantage of it to try to cut expenses. And at the same time, we balanced that budget without increasing a single tax or a single fee. And in fact, we actually cut some taxes. So I think it was truly it was a testament to the leadership. The governor just signed a budget today. He whacked some things that I would have liked to.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about that.
Well, I would have liked to have seen some of those things in there. I really, truly wanted the Benderson Rowing Park. I think the problem with the Benderson Rowing Park was what it was. It was a rowing facility, and people said, well, geez, how do you fund that and not fund more money in the Medicaid? But if we were going to create jobs, that was the perfect opportunity to do it. For very little money when you think about it. We would have created over 1,000 permanent jobs. We would have generated over $6.5 million every single year in sales tax revenue. But again, it was the perception. It was the perception that we were going to sponsor and fund a sporting event, but at the same time, we were going to take money, say, from the transportation additionally advantaged. And so when you try to balance the public perception out with the reality of creating jobs, but I got to tell you, he had a tough job too. And
well, there were a lot of cuts, and the message that I've been able to pick up from the cuts, and I think everybody's still around the state going over the list and seeing where their project or their county fell in, but it was a purely fiscal decision.
I think it was. Yeah, I don't think that he, you know, he didn't favor anybody. He didn't disfavor everybody. He made some tough decisions, and I respect his right. It's certainly his constitutional right to go through that budget, and you know, I think it proves he cut some of the appropriations chair, J.D. Alexander, some things in his area, cut some things that I wanted. He cut some things that Senator Herodopoulos wanted. He cut some things that the Speaker of the House wanted. And so he wasn't playing politics.
It was consistent.
It was consistent and consistently tough, and I admire him for making those decisions.
Well, I think we'll continue to see what those vetoes are throughout the day, and certainly everybody will read about them over
every
the next
reporter in
few
the
days.
state is calling me today. What do you think about these cuts? And I hope they all understand. I'm not about to second guess the governor. I think that he has an extremely tough job, and I respect his ability to do it. Let's
talk a little bit about the governor. You worked with Governor Bush. You've worked with Governor Christ, and now you are working with Governor Scott. Any big differences that jump out?
Yeah, I think that, and I've got a problem because Governor Christ is somebody I like personally. I just happen to disagree with his politics. I happen to disagree with some of the decisions that he made. But Governor Bush went in when I first went in, and I always admired his business acumen, his ability to look at it and make tough decisions. The funny part about it is a lot of people forget that he had the same problems when he first went in of working with the legislature. He had been a chief executive officer. He had been used to calling his own shots. And when he went in, he had some bumpy roads and some bumpy times with the legislature. Governor Scott's feeling that same thing.
And it was Bush's first election as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And he had never been there before either. And so coming in as chief executive, not working with a three-legged stool, it takes you a little while to adjust that you're not the king, okay? You're one of three pieces. And so I think that those two had a very, very similar type thing. And I think at the end of the day, to be honest with you, I think Bush and Scott will come out very roughly the same at the end of their first year, because I think they'll both be successful in turning our economy and turning our business. Where Governor Christ, I just don't think was quite as locked into his convictions and principles as these two are. I think that Scott is not concerned about the polls right now. He's concerned about the economy. He's not concerned about popularity. He's concerned about creating jobs. He's not concerned about the next election. He's concerned about turning our economy around, and I think that's the correct thing for him to do.
Well, and you make a good point, because the media seems to harp on his approval ratings, overall approval ratings. And when you look at what he is doing and compare it to the message he had on the campaign trail, it's consistent.
Very consistent with the deal. You know, it's going to be interesting on that. One thing I've learned about politics, and you certainly have, having been in that position and hopefully going to be there again, that last 6 months of his four-year term, that's going to determine his reelectability. If the cuts that he's making today will turn our economy around, get our employment back to a full employment situation, start generating revenue for the taxes of the state of Florida again, those last 6 months, I guarantee you those approval ratings will go through the roof, because he's making the tough call now, and that's the time to do it.
Well, I recall when Bush made those tough calls, we saw a turnaround.
Absolutely.
And by the end of his second term, we were actually putting money aside. Over objection, people were saying, "Oh, why don't you just go ahead and spend that money? You have it." But as you recall, we said, let's put it aside, save it for a rainy day, and boy, did it go fast when the economy turned.
And once the economy turned, we weren't able to survive it without making some more cuts. And if anything, we should have probably set a little bit more aside, because what we did is we kind of created, you know, a lot of our social benefits. I kind of call it entitlement slavery. People get used to lots of unemployment numbers. They get used to lots of receiving and not giving anything back. And all of a sudden we found ourselves with people thinking that the entitlements were deserved and that they were part of it, that they were right. And instead of saying the right thing, that we should have held down our costs before and set more money aside. And I think the governor right now is concerned about the debt that the state of Florida's got. I think it's his intention to have it totally eliminated within the first 2 years, and I think he's going to do it.
Well, so we're clear for the viewers, we do balance our budget every year. We're required to.
But you know, it's interesting. If we balance our budget because we borrowed money from the feds, for example, for unemployment, and that's exactly what we've been doing. We've been borrowing money from the federal government to balance our unemployment compensation. So are we really balancing the budget?
Or just contributing
or
to
just contributing
debt
to the debt. And so I'm always concerned about that. To me, a balanced budget means you didn't go and borrow money, okay? You controlled your spending. And we have been borrowing money for the unemployment fund from the federal government. So trying to balance that out. I guarantee you, Governor Scott will have the state of Florida completely out of debt before he leaves.
Now, you mentioned that Governor Scott had the CEO mentality, but in Tallahassee, he's one of 3 parts. Mm-hmm. And that's a real unique dynamic this time around because you have super majorities in both the House and the Senate, which means that on a decision of your chamber together with the House, you could override the governor's mm-hmm. vetoes with not much difficulty, as opposed to not having a supermajority, not having that 2/3 in one party. And do you see that tool coming into play in the vetoes?
I don't. And I'll tell you why I don't. I think we all have so much respect for the the three-legged stool, okay, that I don't think we want to go down the path of 2 of them trying to override the other one. I think that we all have respect for the process. I think we all have respect for the fact that, you know, he's got a tough job, we had a tough job, they have a tough job. I would hope that we wouldn't go down that path. Are there a couple of issues that we might want to go back and look for an override? I think that comes up every year. But in order to preserve the three-legged stool, in order to preserve the integrity of the system, I don't believe that you'll see the President of the Senate or the Speaker of the House joining together to go after this governor. I think that they will continue to try to preserve the integrity of the system.
Now, when session began, I guess it was maybe even a special session, there were some overrides of our former governor, and some of the onlookers said, well, this is certainly a message to Governor Christ, but is it perhaps a message to Governor Scott?
I don't think so. I really don't believe that one carries over from the other. I think on Governor Christ, when he changed his party affiliation, when he started changing his thought process, that it no longer fit in with our thought process, I think that was up for grabs. I think that he created the environment. I don't believe that Governor Scott has done that. If you'll remember, Governor Bush, when he came in, he whacked us pretty good on his budget cuts too. And there was certainly no movement for an override. There was, you know, some grumbling, some mumbling. Geez, he cut out my favorite program. Everybody goes back and, you know, throws a bottle of water over in the trash can. But when you think about it, we preserved for him the same integrity that we would hope that we'd give this governor, and give him time to work out his system and give him time to work out his agenda. So I don't think it'll happen.
Let's talk policy a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
You have always been involved in many different policy issues during your career, but one that stands out for the voters down here, and really your reputation around the state, is growth management.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a substantial growth management bill this year. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, you know, it's interesting. I think as a lot of your listeners know, I'm in the construction business. Some people call me the big developer. I mean, I'm not a big developer. I can develop one project.
Is there a big developer anymore?
No, there's not as many big ones. There's a lot more small businessmen than there were before. But the Florida Sustainable Community Association a few years ago gave me the Best Practices Award. I was the first developer to get it, actually the first legislator to get it also. I think that you can build green in the state of Florida. But what happened is when growth management came around in 1985, we had some wonderful ideas and we needed it. We were out of control. But what happened is what I call mission creep. Pretty soon, DEP wanted to look at what DCA was doing, and DCA wanted to look what Florida Department of Transportation was doing. The Florida Department of Transportation wanted to second-guess the counties and second-guess the cities. And pretty soon, we created an environment where government-paid engineers were reviewing government-paid engineers, reviewing government-paid engineers, and it became so burdensome with the bureaucratic oversight, okay, that all of a sudden you couldn't get a project approved. It was taking sometimes 2 and 3 and 4 years to get a project approved, and we were losing our industry. We had industry that wanted to relocate to Florida, but the uncertainty of
it became adversarial.
Absolutely, and in order to get a building permit or to get a zoning change or a comp plan amendment, to create that job that we desperately needed, they said, well, geez, it's going to take 2 or 3 years in Florida, and if I go to South Carolina, I can start moving dirt tomorrow morning. I can start construction on my building in Georgia within 2 weeks, okay? We were no longer an environment of creating jobs, and look what happened to our unemployment situation. We had one of the highest in the state, or in that nation, simply because we were putting up more barricades and more barricades. We need to have growth management, but I don't believe that Tallahassee should be telling the city of Bradenton what they can do or not do on East 14th Street. I think the city of Bradenton is comprehensive. They've got people down there that do that. We don't need to have Tallahassee tell us how to do that. I don't believe that Manatee County, I think they've got competent staff. They shouldn't have to take everything to the state of Florida. And so I think that we overreached at the state, and it was time to bring it home.
And that's what this new legislation accomplished.
That's what we're hoping to do. We drove it down. We put more responsibility on local government, and local government is the best government. If the people who represent Manatee County don't do a good job, then the voters should get rid of them. And if they don't like how their growth is going or how they're being managed, then find other people. But it shouldn't be driven by Tallahassee. I think that the city of Bradenton or Manatee County does a much better job of managing Manatee County than Tallahassee does.
And I'd agree with you, and it's often been said, government closest to the people is the best government.
I think it is.
And maybe you'd agree with me, sometimes you get up in Tallahassee and you get in that chamber and the people you live with are so far away,
you lose contact.
Yeah, you need to be kept in check. And I think our locals, you know, they see these people every day when they convene.
Well, everybody also thought that under the growth management bill that we were taking away all oversight. That's simply not true, okay? We believe that the county should be first. Then if they have a problem, they can go to the regional planning thing. And if the regional planning organization can't handle the problem, then they can come to the state. We're still going to have a planning department, but we're not going to be telling them how to manage the traffic on 14th Street. So we want to drive it down, but we still want to have the assistance up there. If they need planning assistance, you take a small county, say a DeSoto County, that doesn't have a big planning staff, and they need assistance in their planning or their growth management, the state of Florida will still be there for them. So we're going to use the state of Florida as an asset instead of a hammer.
Because at the end of the day, we want to see new jobs.
Absolutely.
We want to have economic growth. And the state should be an asset.
They should be an asset. They should not be a hindrance. They should be an asset. How can we help you? And that's what we're looking to do.
And the governor has that same message. And
oh, he's solid on it. He is absolutely solid on it. Getting rid of the bureaucracy and getting rid of, I mean, we've got a lot of people employed by the state of Florida that do nothing but create headaches for the rest of us, and we should be eliminating them.
Let's talk about voting. You all changed the early voting. I think it went from, what, 15 days now to 7?
Yeah, but really the number of hours didn't change. What we found on the early voting, we have a lot of people today. Our society commutes. A lot of people commute. We have people living in Sarasota working in Tampa. We have people living in Tampa, believe it or not, working in Sarasota. And under the early voting, a lot of them were getting home at the end of the day to find out that the early voting poll was already closed because it shut down at 4 o'clock. So we had a lot of people saying, why aren't they staying open longer? So what we found, we could take and condense the same number of hours that they would have, but put it into a shorter time frame, but extend the hours. And so at the end of the day, that person, say, who's stationed, he might be a military guy who's stationed at MacDill and working out of MacDill, but he lives down in Sarasota or South Manatee County. By the time he gets home, he will be able to take advantage of early voting, and that's what we wanted to do.
And so do you think it will increase access?
Absolutely. It'll certainly increase access to early voting, and that's the one thing we wanted to be able to do.
Because you read the reports and the editorials, and you would think that it was a method to decrease access, but You're saying it's
No,
increasing.
I think it's actually increases. And I think if they would actually look at it that way. Unfortunately, this became politicized. Instead of really looking at helping the voter, it became politicized. It became a Republican thing versus a Democrat thing, and I just think that was the wrong way to look at it.
Tell me a little bit about your priority bills, your personal
Tell me about
bills.
you. What are you going to do next? I hope you're going to join us up here in Tallahassee again and come back up there. And that's one of the problems. I tried to get through a bill this year to extend term limits. You know, when I look at people like yourself, I look at people like myself, by the time you finally learn the system, we've lost the expertise. We've lost the knowledge that you have. You and I both know you've worked with the budget. By the time you're there for 4 years, you still don't understand the budget. At the end of 6 years, you're starting to see somewhere into the budget. Well, all of a sudden, you finally begin to understand the budget, and you're termed out. And so we're hoping that we can change that. So the biggest disappointment I had this year, believe it or not, was the fact that I couldn't get the term limit bill passed, which would allow the voters to decide, do they want to extend the term limits from 8 years to 12. That's all I asked for, was to take it to 12, because I realize it takes you 4 to 6 years to actually learn the system, and we lose and have lost all of our effective, truly effective legislators. And now the lobbyists are controlling it, the staff are controlling it, and the people who elected you or elected me, they're not getting the true representation that they wanted up there because it takes us so long to learn the system. And so that was the biggest disappointment I had for the session.
And that bill would not have affected you personally?
No, I'd have been out.
Make that clear.
I'm out. And, you know, I love the Florida Senate, but the bill that I wanted for term limits would have not affected anybody who was currently there. It would have just been in the future after the next election. And so the new people going in, hopefully, you know, people like yourself who go back in would have the time in order to truly become an expert in their particular area.
The delegation that we have has a lot of new faces simply because of the term limits you just described. Fortunately, you are still on our delegation and the, I don't want to say senior member, but the one who has the most experience at this point.
But I got to tell you.
How'd they do?
I thought they did good. I really did. I thought they did good. Jim Boyd just did an outstanding job. Took on a tough issue, and you know, people criticize, well, why do you have an insurance guy running the insurance? Because that's the only guy that's got any knowledge. Had we not had the term limit deal, maybe somebody else could have learned that knowledge over time. But Jim came in swinging. He came in swinging hard. He got involved. You know, we just had a great delegation. I think that for new people on the block, we did a wonderful job. But you go back to losing people. The year that you got out, you know, we lost the rules chairman, yourself. We lost the Speaker Pro Tem, Ron Reagan. Okay, we lost two very, very powerful, the top 3 or 4 positions in the House of Representatives, we lost. And just about the time you guys were finally, you know, hitting your stride, you're gone.
Finally know where the bathrooms are.
We finally know where the bathroom is on the 4th floor. So I would hope that we would change that system. It's not worked. I don't think that people are ready to get rid of term limits. I still say term limits, and I voted for them, okay? But I did not know the effect at the time. And I think a lot of people didn't quite realize the effect. I think there's some people out there think term limit should be 1 day, but you know, and I understand that. But on the same token, I think that we would be better off extending it a little bit, not getting rid of it, but extending it to say 12 years. I even advocated so we could cut down on the amount of campaigning and cutting the money out of the system, having the House seats be 3 4-year seats, and the Senate seats maybe be 2 6-year seats, or maybe 3 4-year seats, whatever. But given the House members, the day that they get elected, they have to start raising money for the next cycle. It shouldn't be that way. They should be able to go up there and at least learn something before they start having to campaign. So I think it's been a bad deal.
The other aspect to that is an aspect the general public never really gets to see, and that's leadership races. And with the term limits, you have people who, some who are not even elected, vying for leadership positions.
It's amazing because I believe, and I might be wrong, but I think Dean Cannon was in the Speaker's slot before he ever chaired a committee. I think that Will Weatherford was there before he ever chaired a committee. I think that when I look at the next 3 or 4, and I understand that it's even been decided over in the House, you know, 3 more speakers down the road, and none of those ever chaired a committee or in some cases ever even passed a bill. before people were starting to vie for those positions. And I think that it's moving a little bit too fast. I think that, and I think Dean's doing a great job, and I think Will Welliver is going to be fantastic. I think they've made some good choices, but I think we would be better off if we all had a little bit more knowledge before they started the leadership races.
I want to talk to you about what's next. I heard publicly, I think from you at the Lincoln Day dinner,
Yep.
that you are running for the United States Congress as soon as you term out from
I am.
the
We
Senate.
have filed
That's
the papers.
2012.
I'm going to be running in 2012 for the U.S. Congress. And I want to make it perfectly clear. People have questioned me on this. You know, whose seat are you running for? Well, I'm filed to run against Representative Castor. Everybody knows I would never run against Vern. He's a friend. I think he does a great job. He and I philosophically think a whole lot alike. We both like a balanced budget. We think that we should cut down on spending in Washington. We share those same kind of values. But I don't believe that Representative Castor has done the best job that she can for her constituents. I certainly don't like the Obamacare idea. I don't think that they've done anything to move forward on some of the immigration ideas. And so I think that I can make a difference up there. So I do plan on running, and that's what I will be doing in 2012.
And you're getting that geared up
And I
now.
hope you're going to take my chair, and I really do. I think that, and I know that this is not supposed to be the Bill Galvano pushing show, but I really do. I hope that your constituents back you up, because Bill, you did a wonderful job in the House, and I know you'll do a better job in the Senate.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Redistricting is going to play a role in both of those issues.
Redistricting is going to be tough, and a lot of people don't understand how redistricting works. And I did until Amendment 5 and 6 passed, and now I don't think anybody truly is going to understand how redistricting works. You know, we will take the state of Florida, and instead of drawing up into 25 pieces, we're going to carve it up into 27 pieces. And people say, well, geez, are we going to get a new district here? Every district in the state is going to be new. It doesn't matter whose district it is. It will be a new district. The question is where will Castor's seat be that I'm going to be running for? Obviously, I'm hoping for a bigger chunk of Manatee County, but you know, she has a piece of Manatee County now, and I would hope that there will be a seat drawn that Vern and I can both be in Washington. That's my goal.
And so our viewers understand the state legislature determines the federal congressional districts, as well as the state Senate districts, as well as the House districts.
House seats. But at this time, certainly on a congressional district, and I think it affects the state seats also, the final lines will actually be determined by the courts.
Right.
And people don't realize that we may draw them, but as soon as we draw them, then we have to turn them over to the Attorney General's office. They have, I think it's 7 days to review it. Then they turn it over to the Florida Supreme Court. They have 30 days to review it. From there, it goes to federal. They got 60 days to review it. So you will not actually know who your state senator might be or who's going to be running for that seat. And every senator has to run. Every House member has to run. We all have to run. It's going to be a very expensive year for those people who are in the gift of giving. But every single state legislator, state senator, and U.S. congressional person will be campaigning this time.
Senator, we could go on for a long time. We're out of time. I wish you great success in your congressional run. Thank you for joining us here on Weekly Update. And thank you all for joining us this week.